Harlem, 1946. A warehouse on 125th Street, rows of men, standing at attention, boots aligned, shoulders back, eyes forward. Military precision. But this isn't the army. Look closer at the men. Purple hearts pinned to civilian jackets. Bronze stars next to street clothes. Combat infantry badges worn above leather holsters. These aren't just veterans. They're decorated war heroes. Men who stormed Normandy, survivors of the Ardennes, soldiers who defeated fascism in Europe, and now they're taking orders from Bumpy Johnson, a crime boss. The medals gleam under a single hanging bulb. Next to them, weapons that never saw a European battlefield. Tools for a different kind of war, one fought not for democracy, but for territory, for survival. For power in the only economy that would have them, the man at the front of the formation, a former sergeant, 761st Tank Battalion. He commanded men through German fire. Now he coordinates numbers of runners through Harlem blocks. Next to him, a lieutenant, 92nd Infantry Division. He planned tactical assaults across Italy. Now he plans distribution routes for an illegal gambling operation. These men know the chain of command. Operational security. Unit cohesion. The vocabulary of warfare, they're using it to build a criminal empire. How does this happen? How do America's heroes become a gangster's private army? The answer isn't in Harlem, it's in what America did to them when the war ended. February 12, 1946. Batesburg, South Carolina. Isaac Woodard stepped off a Greyhound bus, Army sergeant, honorably discharged 3 hours earlier, still in uniform. He asked the driver if there was time to use a restroom. The police chief beat him so badly he lost both eyes. That was the homecoming. Across the South, black veterans were lynched for wearing their uniforms in public, for acting too proud, for believing their service had earned them something. July 1946, Monroe, Georgia, two veteran couples pulled from a car and executed by a mob. Roger Malcolm, a veteran, George Dorsey, a veteran, their wives were murdered beside them. No one was ever convicted. The violence wasn't just Southern, it was structural, national. The GI Bill promised education, housing loans, and business capital. For white veterans, it was a ladder to the middle class. For black veterans, it was a mirage. Banks refused mortgages in black neighborhoods, official policy, called redlining. Universities rejected black applicants or funneled them into segregated, underfunded programs. The Veterans Administration processed black claims slower, denied them more frequently, steered men toward menial job training instead of college degrees. A 1947 study found that black veterans accessed GI Bill benefits at less than half the rate of white veterans. The wealth gap didn't close after the war, it exploded. Defense contractors who'd begged for workers during wartime now put up whites-only signs. Factories that built tanks with integrated crews refused to hire black veterans as janitors. The unemployment rate for black veterans reached triple that of white veterans by late 1946. Men who'd commanded platoons under fire couldn't get interviews for entry-level positions. You led soldiers through Nazi machine gun fire. You earned a Bronze Star. You came home. And your country told you none of it mattered. The Harlem pressure cooker. They came to Harlem because it was the only place that would have them. And Harlem was drowning. The neighborhood had been overcrowded before the war. Now it was a demographic crisis. Tens of thousands of veterans flooding into 3,005 square miles of Manhattan. The housing stock couldn't absorb them. Families of 6, 7, 8 people crammed into single-room apartments, buildings without heat in winter. Shared toilets in hallways, rats, cockroaches, tuberculosis spreading through tenements that should have been condemned. Landlords knew they had captive tenants. Rents consumed 60–70% of household income. When there was income, a Harlem Tenement Commission report from 1947 documented conditions that violated every city code. Nothing changed, the violations were profitable, and there were no jobs. The skills mismatch was brutal. These men had been trained by the United States military to do very specific things. Combat tactics, weapons operation and maintenance, secure radio communications, logistics coordination, moving supplies and personnel across hostile territory, intelligence gathering and reconnaissance. Small unit leadership under pressure. In 1946, America, those skills had zero civilian market value for black men. You couldn't put machine gun operator on a resume for a clerk position. Your experience planning tactical assaults didn't qualify you for warehouse work. The discipline that made you an effective soldier made white employers nervous. Military bearing read as arrogance when the man standing at attention was black. The psychological wounds went unacknowledged. PTSD didn't have a name yet. Shell shock was something people whispered about, not treated. These men had watched friends die, had killed, had survived months of sustained combat. They came home with nightmares that never stopped, hypervigilance that never relaxed, trauma that had no outlet. Harlem hospital records from 1946 to 1948 show alcoholism rates among black veterans spiking, domestic violence increasing. Mental health crises went untreated because there were no resources and no recognition that war broke something in these men that didn't heal when the shooting stopped. Families fractured under the pressure, marriages collapsed, children went hungry, while their fathers, men who'd been heroes 6 months earlier, descended into despair, and over all of it, the existing power structure ground everything down further. The Italian mafia controlled Harlem's economic engine. The numbers racket, illegal lottery, but it was how the neighborhood moved money. The Genovese family and their associates extracted millions annually from Harlem residents. The profit flowed downtown. The risk stayed uptown. The police were either complicit or actively hostile. Often shaking down the same numbers, runners the mafia employed, creating a double tax on survival. Legitimate pathways to prosperity were systematically blocked. Black-owned businesses couldn't get loans. City contracts went to white firms. Union jobs, the good-paying construction, transportation, and manufacturing positions, were reserved for white workers through formal and informal exclusion. The professional class was tiny and under siege. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, they existed, but the pipeline to create more was deliberately narrowed. This was the world Bumpy Johnson had navigated for 2 decades. He understood it better than anyone. He'd already proven something most thought impossible. A black man could challenge white power structures and survive. He'd gone to war with Dutch Schultz in the 1930s when Schultz tried to take over Harlem's numbers. He'd done time in Alcatraz. He'd come back and consolidated power in a landscape designed to prevent exactly that. He had credibility where it mattered. Veterans knew his name. The street knew his history. He understood both survival and strategy. And in 1946, Bumpy saw what others missed. These desperate, traumatized, unemployed veterans weren't broken. They were trained tactical operators without a mission. They weren't unemployable. They were specialists in a market that refused to recognize their skills. They weren't criminals, not yet. They were soldiers. They understood hierarchy, discipline, operational security, unit cohesion. They knew how to take orders and give them. They'd proven they could execute complex missions under pressure. They had leadership experience, technical skills, and a willingness to sacrifice for something larger than themselves. All they needed was someone to give them a mission when America wouldn't. Bumpy Johnson didn't see gang recruits. He saw an army. He didn't build a street crew. He built a military-grade organization using the same men the U.S. government had trained, deployed, and abandoned. The veterans made a choice, not between right and wrong. Those options had been taken from them. Between starvation and survival, between watching their families suffer and doing something about it. The country that sent them to war had already made its choice about their value, so they made theirs. The storefronts appeared on Lenox Avenue and 7th Avenue. In late 1946, hand-painted signs, Veterans Employment Services, skills training for returning soldiers. They looked like community organizations, social clubs where veterans could gather, play cards, talk. They weren't. Bumpy's recruitment infrastructure was deliberate, targeted. The pitch wasn't join a gang, it was continue your service, not to a country that abandoned you, but to your own community. To Harlem. To each other the language mattered. Mission, unit, operations. Chain of command, words, veterans understood in their bones. The selection process was strategic. Bumpy wasn't looking for muscle. He had muscle. He was looking for specialists, men with technical military occupational specialties, Signal Corps communications specialists who understood radio protocols and encryption, quartermaster logistics, coordinators who'd managed supply chains across war zones, combat engineers who understood structural vulnerabilities and demolition, military police who knew investigative procedures and security protocols. The initial mission was framed carefully, not run numbers or move product. It was protect Harlem operations from outside control. The Italian mafia was extracting wealth from the community. Bumpy positioned his operation as defense. Self-determination, economic sovereignty. It resonated because it was partially true. These men had fought fascism in Europe. Now they were being asked to fight economic colonialism at home. The moral framing made the transition easier. They weren't becoming criminals. They were becoming soldiers again. Just in a different kind of war. The military structure applied to crime. What Bumpy built wasn't a gang. It was a paramilitary organization operating under criminal cover. The structure was platoon-based. 4 to 6 operational cells. Each with 8 to 12 men. A clear chain of command. Cell leaders reported to lieutenants. Lieutenants to Bumpy's inner command staff. Everyone had a rank. Everyone knew their position in the hierarchy. The 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters, had used a similar structure. These veterans already understood it. Specialization was embedded. Each cell had a communications specialist, a logistics coordinator, an intelligence officer, a tactical lead. Roles were assigned based on military training, not seniority or loyalty alone. Competence determined position. The communication system was sophisticated. Signal Corps veterans adapted military radio protocols for street operations. Code words, frequency changes. Timed check-ins. The NYPD was still using phone calls and beat cops. Bumpy's network was coordinating across Harlem in real time with encrypted communications that police couldn't intercept or decode. FBI surveillance transcripts from 1948 show investigators frustrated by military-grade operational security in Harlem policy operations. They couldn't penetrate it because it was designed by men trained to prevent enemy intelligence gathering. The intelligence network was layered. Veterans with reconnaissance training created surveillance systems, spotters at key intersections, rotating observation posts, pattern analysis to identify undercover police, counter-surveillance to detect Italian mafia movements. They mapped Harlem like it was enemy territory, which, in many ways, it was. Logistics ran like quartermaster operations. The numbers racket required moving cash, slips, and information across dozens of locations daily. Veterans who'd coordinated supply drops in France now ran collection routes with the same precision, scheduled pickups. Backup routes, contingency protocols if a location was compromised. Inventory systems to track every transaction. Tactical planning applied military doctrine to street operations. When a policy bank needed to move locations, it wasn't chaotic. It was planned like a tactical withdrawal, primary route, secondary route, rally points, covering elements, escape routes mapped and rehearsed. If police raided one location, the operation continued elsewhere without interruption. The discipline code was internal military justice. Violations of operational security didn't result in street violence. They resulted in courts-martial-style proceedings, evidence presented, defense allowed, punishments ranged from demotion to expulsion from the organization. Honor codes and loyalty oaths. created unit cohesion stronger than fear. This was the genius. The Italian mafia relied on fear, family ties, and ethnic loyalty. Bumpy built something more durable: shared experience and professional structure, military brotherhood. These men had bled together, even if not in the same units. They understood sacrifice. They valued competence and mission success over ego. Traditional organized crime was feudal: loyalty to a boss, personal relationships, emotional volatility. Bumpy's organization was modern military: loyalty to the mission, professional standards, systematic operations. Veterans understood concepts civilian criminals didn't: mission objectives, operational security, unified command, after-action reviews to improve performance. They brought institutional knowledge from the most effective military organization in the world and applied it to an illegal economy. The Mafia had enforcers. Bumpy had tactical units. The Mafia had runners. Bumpy had logistics specialists. The Mafia had informants. Bumpy had an intelligence apparatus. It wasn't just more effective, it was a different category of organization entirely. NYPD intelligence reports from 1947 to 1940 noted that Harlem policy operations had become militarized and resistant to traditional enforcement methods. What police meant was they were facing an opponent who operated with discipline and structure they couldn't match. The transformation was complete. Scattered, desperate veterans had become a coordinated force. Not because Bumpy invented new methods, because he recognized that the U.S. military had already trained these men perfectly. He just gave them a mission their country wouldn't. Summer 1947. The Genovese family made their decision. Bumpy's operation had grown too large, too organized, too successful. What started as black-controlled policy banks in a few Harlem blocks now threatened Italian dominance across the entire neighborhood. The economics were clear. Every dollar Bumpy controlled was a dollar the Mafia lost. This wasn't negotiable territory. It was war, but this wasn't a typical mob conflict. This was a test. Could military training overcome institutional power? Could black veterans with tactical skills defeat white organized crime with police protection, political connections, and generational infrastructure? The veterans understood what was being asked of them. Risk your life again, not for democracy this time. Not for freedom or defeating fascism, for control of an illegal gambling operation, for the right to run numbers in Harlem, for a criminal enterprise. Some of the men started asking questions they'd avoided until now. A former corporal, 92nd Infantry Division, he'd led men through German artillery fire in Italy. Now he was coordinating security for policy banks. One night, sitting in a Lenox Avenue social club, he said it out loud. We traded one uniform for another, different flag, same orders. Are we still just following commands? Another veteran, communications specialist, heard his 7-year-old daughter ask why Daddy's friends came over at night with bags of money. How do you explain that you're protecting an operation that takes dollars from families who can't afford to lose them? The internal conflict was tearing some of them apart. They'd survived the war, come home to nothing. Bumpy gave them purpose, income, brotherhood. He gave them back their dignity when America stripped it away. But at what cost? Bumpy understood the fracture forming. He reframed the conflict: not crime versus law, self-determination versus exploitation. This wasn't about gambling. It was about whether black people controlled their own economic destiny or remained under white power structures. The Italians extracted wealth from Harlem and gave nothing back. Bumpy's operation employed Harlem residents, circulated money within the community, provided when the city wouldn't. The psychological framing worked because it was partially true and partially a lie. The truth: black economic control mattered. The lie: that didn't make gambling less destructive. The tactical execution showed everything they'd learned: coordinated operations across multiple locations, intelligence networks tracking mafia movements, defensive positions fortified and manned, escape routes planned, communication protocols encrypted, supply chains secured, military precision applied to territorial control. FBI wiretap transcripts from 1948 captured one veteran saying, We're running this like Normandy, operational phases, contingencies, after-action reviews, except we're defending policy banks, not liberating France. The operation succeeded. Bumpy's organization held territory. The mafia's attempts to dismantle the network failed. Against military-grade coordination, the veterans proved their training translated. They were more disciplined, better organized, tactically superior. They won. And that's when the real weight hit. Because victory meant something different now. In Europe, victory meant liberation. Defeated fascism. Saved lives. Here, victory meant control of gambling operations that drained Harlem families of money they didn't have. Every successful defense of a policy bank was also a successful defense of the system that kept the neighborhood poor. One veteran watched a woman bet her rent money, watched her lose, watched her children go without because of the operation he was protecting. He'd earned a Bronze Star for valor. He'd carried wounded men under fire. Now he was ensuring an illegal lottery could continue taking money from desperate people. The moral contradiction became impossible to ignore. Bumpy's organization provided for veterans society abandoned. That was real. But it also perpetuated cycles of poverty through gambling addiction. Also real. It gave men dignity and purpose, and it exploited the community it claimed to protect. Both things were true simultaneously. The impossible question paralyzed some of them. Is economic survival through crime better than dignified poverty? If you can't feed your family legally, does illegal work become justified? If exploitation is the only opportunity available, are you wrong to take it? And the deeper question, if you exploit your own community to survive, are you a victim or a perpetrator? Can you be both? There was no clean answer. Just choices, made in impossible circumstances, created by systemic abandonment. The veterans had defeated fascism in Europe. They'd proven their discipline could overcome mafia power in Harlem. But they couldn't defeat the fundamental truth. America had given them two options. Starve with honor, or survive through exploitation. They chose survival, and they'd carry the weight of that choice for the rest of their lives. By the mid-1950s, Bumpy's veteran network began to fracture. Some men found pathways out. The Korean War created new defense jobs. The civil rights movement opened a few doors. A handful went to college on delayed GI Bill benefits. After legal challenges forced compliance, they left quietly, carrying guilt and relief in equal measure. Others didn't leave. They went to prison, racketeering charges, weapons violations. The same tactical skills that made them effective made them targets once law enforcement finally coordinated a response. Federal sentences, state time. Years gone. Some died. Violence sometimes, but also alcoholism, untreated PTSD. The slow grinding down of men who'd survived war only to be destroyed by what came after. Bumpy himself went back to prison in 1952. The organization didn't survive his absence intact. The community's memory split and never unified. Older Harlem residents who lived through that era remember contradictions. Some recall Bumpy's network as protection, black men standing up to white exploitation, providing when the city abandoned them. Others remember the gambling addiction, the money lost, the families broken by policy bets that never hit. Both memories are true. The children left behind grew up in the confusion. Their fathers were war heroes. Bronze stars in dresser drawers. Honorable discharge papers framed on walls. But also secrets, whispers. Prison visits, the knowledge that Dad did something the family didn't discuss openly. How do you inherit that legacy? Pride and shame woven so tightly, you can't separate them. The universal truth, the pattern didn't end in Harlem in the 1950s. It repeated. It's still repeating. Vietnam veterans came home to the same abandoned infrastructure, disproportionately black and brown soldiers fighting a controversial war, returning to communities with no jobs, no support, no recognition. PTSD had a name by then, but still no adequate treatment. Some found their way into street organizations, gangs with military structure. the same skills transfer, the same impossible choices. Iraq and Afghanistan veterans faced updated versions of identical failures, higher rates of unemployment for veterans of color, PTSD and traumatic brain injury going undertreated, homelessness. Incarceration. The Department of Justice reported in 2021 that black veterans are incarcerated at nearly twice the rate of white veterans, even after controlling for offense severity. The cycle persists because the system hasn't changed. When society trains men for war, then fails to reintegrate them into peace, alternative structures fill the void. Always have, always will, street organizations, gangs, criminal enterprises. They offer what the VA doesn't: purpose, brotherhood, immediate income, respect. The lesson is systemic. America knows how to create soldiers. It has never figured out how to create veterans, especially not veterans of color, who return from serving a country that still doesn't treat them as equal citizens. The statistics are damning. Veteran homelessness disproportionately affects black and brown, former service members. PTSD treatment is less accessible in communities of color. Employment discrimination continues. The GI Bill still produces racial disparities in who accesses education benefits and who doesn't. How many Bumpy Johnsons has America created by refusing to honor its promises? How many men, trained at taxpayer expense to protect democracy, were then forced into illegal economies to survive? How many military-grade criminal organizations exist because society abandoned the warriors it created? Bumpy's legacy isn't about glorifying crime. It's about revealing failure. These veterans deserved better. They earned better. They were owed better. They never received it. The moral weight falls on the system that creates this cycle, generation after generation, and refuses to break it. WW2 veterans, Vietnam veterans, Gulf War veterans, post-9/11 veterans, different wars, same abandonment, same impossible choices. The question isn't why some veterans turn to crime. The question is why America keeps creating the conditions that make crime the rational choice. Bumpy Johnson saw what the country refused to see. Soldiers without a mission will find one. If you don't give them a legitimate path, they'll build an illegitimate one. That truth didn't die in Harlem in 1968 when Bumpy did. It's alive right now, in every city where veteran unemployment runs high, in every VA hospital with year-long wait lists, in every courtroom where a decorated soldier stands trial because survival meant breaking laws. The war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It just comes home, and if peace doesn't have a place for warriors, war will find them anyway.